Hello and welcome back to Neo-Psychology with me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach online psychology lessons to my wonderful students. Today we're cracking on with research methods, specifically lesson 19, observational design. So we've had a look at different types of observations and now we're going to look at observational designs. Let's get started. Okay. Start with some multiple choice questions. Complete these multiple choice questions on observational techniques that we've done in the last couple lessons. Give these a go, please. Have a little think what you would put as the answer before I give the answers out. Which of these does not relate to observational techniques? A. Covert versus overt. B. Complete versus partial. C. Participant versus non-participant. And D. Controlled versus naturalistic. A, B, C or D, what do you reckon? Say it out loud. No, proper out loud. Say it out loud. Yes, B. Well done. Cracked it. Smashing. Right, here we go. Number 2. Which is an undisclosed or covert observation? Which of these is a covert participant observation? A. Rosenhan's pseudo-patient study. B. Milgram's obedience study. C. Ash's conformity study. Or D. Bandura's Bobo study. Yeah, it was in the plenary last lesson, and it is A. Rosenhan's pseudo-patient study. Number 3. Which is least likely to apply to participant observations? A. The risk of going native. B. A first-hand account. C. Insight into group mentality. Or D. Low external validity. Least likely to apply to participant observations. Yes, it's D, low external validity, okay? Because you're part of it, then it's probably going to be high in external validity. And then number 4, an observation that takes place in the setting where the target behavior would usually occur best describes what? Disclosed observations, non-participant observations, naturalistic observations, or all observations. Which one? Yes, it is C, naturalistic observations. There we go. Let's have a look at our learning objectives for today. Show comprehension and apply knowledge of observational design. And then learning objective 2, identify and analyze inter-observer reliability or inter-rater reliability as it's sometimes known. Let's have a look. Observational design. In the previous lesson, we considered the observational techniques, the different types of observations available to psychologists. Today, we focus on how a researcher would actually plan an observational study. How are you going to plan these observations? So we've got unstructured and structured. How do you define those two? Let's have a look. Great question. One of the key influences on the design of any observation is how the researcher intends to record their data. The researcher may simply want to write down everything they see. This is referred to as an unstructured observation and tends to produce accounts of behavior that are rich in detail. So, think about observation. If I was just literally observe everything that's going on and everything that happens, I just literally write it down. I'm writing down everything. This would be an unstructured observation. It's really basic. It's really simple. And you're just essentially writing every single thing down. Okay. Of course, it's rich in detail, but it's quite difficult to do all these things. That's an unstructured observation. Let's have a look at types of structured observations though. But before we do that, let's have a look. How is this useful? When do we use unstructured observations? This method may be appropriate when observations are small in scale and involve few participants. For example, observing interaction between a couple and a therapist within a marriage guidance counseling session, or possibly a family session with a few members. And then you just write down all the observations going on, okay? So you write down what's going on, what's everyone's behavior. However, if you had 50 participants, though, in your observation, it's very difficult to take down everything that's going on. So it might not be appropriate to use an unstructured observation for that. Often, however, there may be too much going on in a single observation to record it all. Therefore, it is necessary to simplify the target behaviors that will become the main focus of the investigation. So, for example, if the target behavior was aggression, so if we wanted to observe aggressive behavior or aggression, and the setting was a school playground, the specific acts could be verbal or physical, that make up the target behavior. They would need to be clearly defined, okay? Structured observations, such as these, allow the researcher to quantify or operationalize their observations using a predetermined list of behaviors and sampling methods. And we're going to have a look at what this is called in a second. Behavior categories. There we go. Literally 1 second. These are called behavioral categories. So this is what you do in a structured observation. You create behavior categories. In order to produce a structured record of what a researcher sees or hears, it is first necessary to break the target behavior up into a set of behavioral categories, sometimes referred to as a behavior checklist. This is very similar to the idea of operationalization. Target behaviors to be studied should be precisely defined and made observable and measurable. So essentially, if that observation, if the thing you're observing, if it was like aggression, like we spoke about, you would make different behavioral categories and define each one. One could be, if I was observing it in a playground, it could be verbal, someone swearing possibly. It could be physical, someone pushing someone. It could be even more severe, someone fighting. And I'll have all these behavioral categories. And when I saw these target behaviors, I'll do a little tally. I'll tick them off. Yes, I saw this one, I saw this one. Something along those lines in a structured observation. Here's another example. For instance, the target behavior affection may be broken down into observational categories, such as hugging, kissing, smiling, holding hands, etc. Each of these behaviors must be observable. There should be no need for inferences to be made, such as being loving, okay? Two observers might interpret this differently, and thus it would not be a reliable category. So we've broken down the target behavior of possibly affection into all those different categories, and once you saw them, you would tick them off or tally them. Before the observation begins, the researcher should ensure that they have, as far as possible, included all of the ways in which the target behavior may occur within their behavioral checklist. Okay, try and think about all the different types of behaviors, and therefore you've got it all in your categories. Okay, we've got a definition for you. Behavioral categories. How would one define these behavioral categories? So, give this a go, have a little think, write down the definition. If you've got the definition down, try summarizing it or reducing the definition into 6 words. Let's have a think. Behavioral categories. It's when a target population, it's when a target behavior is broken up into components, yes, that are observable and measurable. There we go, lovely. So behavioral categories is when a target behavior is broken up into components that are observable and measurable. You can give a definition if you want, or an example, such as identifying affection and thinking of behavioral categories such as kissing, hugging, holding hands, etc. Here we go, I've got a question for you. Behavioral categories. Draw up a behavioral checklist or categories of facial expressions that might be observed in a 6-month-old infant. So all of the different facial expressions. Try to observe all of the rules of behavioral categories explained. So I want you to come up with your behavioral list. So it's going to be a list of all the different facial expressions that you might see in a 6-month-old infant, okay? And then have them all there, and then you'll tally them up once you saw them. But I just want you to create that table. Create a table or a tally of all the different facial expressions that you might see or you might observe in a 6-month-old infant. Pause the video now and give that a go. Otherwise, let's look at the answers. So here are some of the answers. It might look like something on the right. Smiling, frowning, crying, surprise, distress possibly, and content. Content, this may be known as a dustbin category and includes lots of different expressions. So content just means like neutral, like they're doing fine. It is also likely to be the category that is recorded when the baby infant appears to be expressionless. So you're going to have lots of categories. And sometimes there's something that's called a dustbin category, where it's one that's sort of like miscellaneous, where they're not doing anything. Okay. Within structured observations, there are different sampling methods. Sampling, not as in sampling as in the type of sample or participants. Sampling method is in how you're going to observe certain types of behavior and tally it. So, continuous recording of behavior is a key feature of unstructured observations. And in an unstructured observation, you're recording everything and it's continuous. Everything that's going on, yes, brilliant, lovely. In which all instances of behavior are recorded. For very complex behaviors, however, this method may not be practical or feasible. As such, in structured observations, the researcher must use a systematic way of sampling their observations. Note that sampling in this context has a different meaning to that discussed previously. We've got two types of sampling. We've got event sampling and time sampling. Let's have a look at event sampling first of all. Event sampling. Event sampling involves counting the number of times a particular behavior or event occurs in a target individual or group. If we were to use our example of the baby and the facial expressions, every time the baby smiled, there you go, it smiled. Every time the baby frowned, there you go, I'm tallying every time they do that. Another instance could be this. Event sampling of dissent at a football match would mean counting the number of times players disagree with the referee. So every time it happens, you record that data. That's an example of event sampling. Let's get a definition down. Event sampling. Give that a go. There's only 3 words to fill in. Again, if you filled it in, try summarizing the keyword into 6 words, reducing it down if you can. Event sampling. A target behavior or event is first established, then the researcher records this event every time it occurs. Okay, so event sampling is you have a target behavior or event is first established through your behavioral categories. Then the researcher records this event every time it occurs. The other sampling technique is time sampling. Time sampling involves recording behavior within a pre-established time frame. For example, in a particular football match, we may only be interested in one specific player, so we may make a note using a behavioral checklist of what our target individual is doing every 30 seconds. Or it could be every minute or whatever time you want. It could be every minute. So, time sampling is instead of writing down in an unstructured observation every time everything that's going on, or in a event sampling, every time that one event happens, you record it. In time sampling, you have a certain time period and you go, right, every 5 minutes, for example, every 5 minutes, I'm going to stop and see whatever that person's doing or whatever you're observing is doing. And then during that increment where the time has gone off, what are they doing? They're doing this, tick that off. Another 5 minutes goes, do it again, lovely, right? And you're getting a sample of their observation, of their behavior that way. Let's get a definition down, please. A target individual, time sampling, a target individual or group is first established, then the researcher records their behavior in a fixed time frame, say every 60 seconds. So there's an example, every 60 seconds. Okay, so here's a fun little task for us to do. Now, from now until the end of this lesson, I want you to observe my behavior as the teacher. This may have worked better with a live lesson, but nonetheless, we're going to try with this video lesson. I was going to get half of you will be observing my behavior and recording it via event sampling. So as and when I do that certain event in the behavior category, you tick it off. And some of you will do it through time sampling. I tell you what, you decide which one you want to do. Event sampling is when you record it every event that happens, every time that event happens. And the other one's going to be time sampling. So let's say every 30 seconds on this video, when you see me doing whatever I'm doing, you record it in your behavioral categories. You should all keep a tally using the behavior categories table on the right. Some of these may be relevant, some of these categories may not. For example, talking is going to be one of the biggest ones. I probably might not be silent, but you might find an opportunity in time sampling when I am silent. Got to be sitting. I think try and come up with some of the behaviors you think you may observe from me in this video, like such as smiling or laughing, haha, something along those lines, I think, whilst I'm teaching you the second half of this lesson. And that's observational design. Okay, have a little think about one thing you learned about observational design. Do you think learning about why do you think learning about observational design is important, and how does it apply in real life? Any questions? Let me know. Okay, so that was observational design. Learning objective 2 is we're going to identify and analyze inter-observer reliability. What is this inter-observer reliability, I hear you ask? Well, it is recommended that researchers do not conduct observational studies alone. We're quite needy people, so we need someone to do it with us. Single observers may miss important details or may only notice events that confirm their opinions or hypotheses. This introduces bias into the research process. So if I was observing people's behavior, I might interpret them in the way that I think that I want to find. It might be conscious, it might be unconscious, but the point is, it's important to not do it alone, so you have somebody else doing it with you to ensure that there's going to be less bias. To make data recording more objective and unbiased, observations should be carried out by at least 2 researchers. It is vital, however, that pairs of observers are consistent in their judgments and that any data they record is the same or very similar. As such, observers must be trained to establish inter-observer reliability. So what is this? Observers should familiarize themselves with the behavioral categories to be used. Then they observe the same behavior at the same time, perhaps as part of a small-scale pilot study. Then observers should compare the data they have recorded and discuss any differences in interpretations. Finally, observers should analyze the data from the study. Inter-observer reliability is calculated by correlating each pair of observations made, and an overall figure is produced. Right, let's get a definition of inter-observer reliability, please. What is this? What is this we're talking about, inter-observer reliability? Well, it's the extent to which there is agreement between 2 or more observers involved in observations of a behavior. Easy, okay? A general rule is that there is more than 80% agreement on the observations. The data has high inter-observer reliability. So you want high inter-observer reliability. You want to make sure that what you're observing and what the other researcher is observing is the same thing, and you're both analyzing it and operationalize it and observing the behaviors and categorizing them together similarly. Because you're watching the same behavior, your inter-observer reliability should be quite high. It's not good if I'm observing behavior and another researcher is observing behavior and we're looking at the same thing. However, we've both interpreted the behavior in completely different ways. That would be low inter-observer reliability. Okay. The observation is now complete. You can stop recording all the things that I'm doing. Check the inter-observer reliability of your set of observations using the behavioral categories for your observation study and compare it to the person next to you. You might not have someone next to you. If you do, brilliant. Is your data similar? Did you establish high inter-observer reliability? And that's inter-observer reliability. Identify one thing you learned about inter-observer reliability. Why do you think it's important? And how does inter-observer reliability apply in real life? Any questions again? Let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them. But there's our learning objectives for today. Okay, here's the plenary, a nice little plenary, a brief one. Summarize observational design into 1 sentence. Then reduce observational design into 5 words if possible. Then try and reduce it into 1 word. Is that even possible? Not even sure. And there we go. There's the lesson for today. Thank you for joining today's lesson. Today was lesson 19, observational design. Next lesson, we're going to have a look at evaluating those things. It's going to be a brief lesson, having a look at what's the strengths and weaknesses of unstructured and structured and behavioral categories and those types of things. Be sure to write up your notes for next lesson. Well done, my neo-psychologist. Keep up the brilliant work. I've been Mr. Neo. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will, I feel like a prince, I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills, cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels, I wanted to flex, they told me to chill. I'm making a flip, my life is a flick, now load up the film.